Americans for Fair Taxation presents the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, president of Americans for Fair Taxation, and recorded by Bob Paxton, a volunteer with the Florida FAIRtax Educational Association. And now, this week's Chairman's Report.
Hello, I'm Bob Paxton with the AFFT Chairman's Report for Friday, August 8th, 2025. This week's Chairman's Report is guest written by Jade Walle, a practicing CPA who has been on the Americans for Fair Taxation Board of Directors. The fair tax or the income tax? Which is better for U.S. business? Now, with one big beautiful bill signed into law on July 4th, 2025, a natural question arises. Which is better for business, the current income tax system as amended by this new law, or the fair tax? Now, we should acknowledge that the big beautiful bill did improve the landscape within our current income tax system. For example, the child tax credit would have reverted back to $1,000 in 2026 without the big beautiful bill. It has now been increased to $2,500 per child. All current income tax brackets would have increased beginning in 2026, but now they'll remain at their current levels. And of course, an increase in income tax rates would have been a huge wet blanket on the U.S. economy. Now, other favorable changes include no tax on tips, overtime, and the new expanded deduction to shield most Social Security income, among other benefits. But what if we were to look beyond the income tax system outside of the seemingly endless rearranging of the Titanic's deck chairs, though? The income payroll tax system saddles the American people with $1 trillion of annual illegal tax evasion and endless loopholes, exclusions, exceptions, adjustments, deductions, and credits. The complexity is such that it takes a PhD to even begin to understand it, and no one on earth comprehends it fully, not even the people who wrote it. Now, the income tax is notoriously unstable. Thousands of changes to the tax code are proposed every congressional session, and there's a lobbyist behind just about every one of them. Now, the end result is a system that imposes an immense cost on U.S. businesses, both in time and money. We're talking about billions of dollars and billions of hours each and every year. Now, companies must hire high-priced tax attorneys, consultants, and CPAs to scenario plan, strategize, and model out effects of potential changes to the tax code. This uncertainty often leads to significant job-producing, economy-cultivating expansion, and organic growth investments falling by the wayside. So, if the current system ship is sinking, why do we keep attempting to patch up its broken chandeliers? Now, under the fair tax, U.S. businesses will have a consistent, level playing field that treats all businesses fairly and imposes no tax on any business income. In fact, only an extremely small percentage of U.S. businesses would need to contend with a fair tax at all. Only those businesses engaged in retail sales directly to consumers will have to collect and remit the fair tax. This means that just a few thousand U.S. companies, think Walmart, Home Depot, Macy's, Amazon, etc., those companies would bring in the vast majority of fair tax receipts. This will drastically reduce illegal evasion by over 90%. Now, most U.S. businesses are wholesale companies selling products or services to other business along the supply chain flow. They would be free of any business tax compliance obligations altogether. Furthermore, American companies will no longer have an employment penalty. The current obligation to match each employee's 7.65% Social Security and Medicare tax withholding goes away with the fair tax. Think drastic cost decreases for all U.S. businesses. Also, the built-in, embedded, and difficult-to-see cost of income payroll taxes along the supply chain, estimated to be over 20% of the cost of all U.S. retail goods and services, that suddenly falls out of the cost buildup of U.S.-made products and services. Now, I'm feeling a real groundswell of businesses with an insatiable desire to relocate manufacturing facilities and headquarters to the United States, the new tax haven of the world. Now, the fair tax does bring some disadvantages that we must also acknowledge. The ability to divide Americans with proposed changes to the income tax code, think the rich must pay their fair share, that would no longer be possible, and having less strife in our country can only lead to ruinous things. Every U.S. citizen would keep their entire paycheck, receive their monthly prebate, and pay the fair tax when they purchase new goods and services. The ability to avoid the fair tax on life's largest expenditures, such as homes and cars, creates a freedom, and giving people control over when they pay their taxes would clearly be unhealthy for our citizens. Now, the ability of Congress to insert complex nuances, exceptions, and loopholes into the tax code for special constituents, lobbyists, and campaign contributors would vanish overnight. The party that controls Congress would no longer be able to reward their friends with tax breaks and punish their enemies with tax penalties. Now, this could cause the entire Washington establishment system to break down. The IRS's unfettered access to every U.S. citizen's personal financial records would go away. This includes not only income, but also property ownership and home details, right down to their square footage, bank accounts, investments, health care coverage, and even their automobile's make, model, and mileage. The government's ability to know everything about you would be permanently impaired with the fair tax. Also, the ability to seize Americans' bank accounts without due process, communication, or cause would vanish as well. What would the government do without civil asset forfeiture? I'm aghast at the humanity. Now, the fair tax would also remove the ability of over 20 million people residing in the country illegally to escape paying into the U.S. Treasury. Currently, people in the U.S. illegally do not fill out 1040 forms with the IRS each year to report their income and remit their income tax into the U.S. coffers. Now, if 20 million people on average spend $50,000 a year, multiplied by the 23% fair tax rate, that's $230 billion in annual incremental Treasury receipts. That's a quarter of the current $1 trillion annual illegal evasion. Under the fair tax, by this conservative estimate, 20 million or more people would pay the fair tax with no prebate as they consume and live in the greatest country on earth. Now, although $230 billion in tax collections are nice, illegal immigration would be disincentivized, and that would be a huge handicap of the fair tax that we'll have to concede. Now, given the differences between the fair tax and the income tax, which do you believe would be better for U.S. businesses? I guess the real question is, should we continue to patch up the Titanic or get a new ship? In conclusion, Jade has clearly explained how the fair tax eliminates all the drama that was needed to pass the big beautiful bill and also the complexity needed to write the countless provisions. While a 21% corporate tax rate's okay, how much better would it be if it was 0%? Now, while no income tax on tips and overtime is nice, the recipients will still have to pay that 7.65% FICA tax. Now, under the fair tax, the tax rate on overtime and tips really is 0 because no work is being taxed. Now, many of you have labored tirelessly for freedom from the federal income tax and the IRS. You deserve a great deal of credit for your efforts to educate the American people on the need to fund the American government in a way that's good for America and that returns freedom to the American people. It's imperative, though, that we don't replace the current income tax in the IRS with an alternative system that can still be manipulated by the ruling elite. We must let Congress and the President know that the best way to replace the income tax in the IRS is with the fair tax. Now, make no mistake about it, the fair tax is a grave threat to the ruling elites. It will strip them of their power and their ability to control us through the tax system. Their opposition to the fair tax will be fierce and unrelenting, and don't think for an instant they won't use half-truths, deception, and downright lies in their desperate attempt to hang on to their power. However, with the support of this president, we can finally eliminate the income tax and the IRS. Now, of course, the best course of action is not only to repeal the income tax and abolish the IRS, but to repeal the 16th Amendment as well so that no future administration can ever shackle the American people with an income tax again. We must come together and ensure that real tax reform, the fair tax, is not subverted by the elites in D.C. This will take the diligent efforts from all of us. We need your financial assistance, and we need your grassroots assistance. Now, if you have contacts that will allow us to get more information about the fair tax to President Trump, please let us know. Also, please email us at info@fairtax.org, and we'll give you some options on how you can best help us. At a minimum, please call your congressional representative and ask if he or she supports the fair tax. If so, thank him or her for their support and suggest they become a co-sponsor of H.R. 25 if they're not one already. If not, ask why not. Now, if your representative claims to be unfamiliar with the fair tax, offer to have someone come to their office and explain it to them. The solution: pass the fair tax. Now, why would D.C. pass the fair tax and give up an almost unlimited source of donations? Well, they won't, at least not voluntarily. The only way they will is if the rest of us demand it. Isn't it time to end this ludicrous tax collection system in the IRS along with it? Help bring about real tax reform and stop future IRS abuses. By contributing, or actually investing, $10.40 a month, you help provide a financial base to Americans for fair taxation. Now, if you can make larger contributions/investments, these will be used not for salaries, as we're all volunteers, but for the needed updates to our economic studies, which will be vital for all future years. Please go to FAIRtax.org to invest in AFFT and help us pass the fair tax. It's an investment in your and your family's future.
This has been the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, President of Americans for Fair Taxation. Check back every week for news and information about the fair tax, and learn why the fair tax should replace our antiquated federal income tax system. If you'd like to receive a copy of the Chairman's Report in your inbox every week, sign up at FAIRtax.org.